Connection is the ultimate way that we can recover from a struggle with pornography viewing. And that connection begins with reconnecting with ourselves. And that really does allow us to connect with others. And that type of connection really is the antidote to a struggle with pornography viewing. If you're like me, you know your mind can be your best or your worst friend. Our mind is an amazing tool that can do incredible things. But our mind can also create problems out of nowhere. Sometimes our mind keeps recommending the same solutions to problems even when they aren't working. I see this pattern play out as individuals try to overcome their anxiety, depression, or even struggles with pornography, using approaches that make sense but aren't very helpful. This podcast will show you how real researchers and clinicians are changing the way we approach mental health and reveal helpful research-supported principles designed to help real people with real problems. My name is Dr. Cameron Staley, and welcome to the Life After Series Radio. Well, we're back again. We took a couple of weeks off for, holidays and me getting sick, so it's always fun to catch up and kind of see where things are with you. And this is like a big day. You actually got through all 10 modules of the Life After Pornography program. And there's no diploma I'm going to send you, but maybe I should. You got through them all. I'm curious how that was for you to get through those final modules that have been sitting there for you.
Well, it's funny because we talked previously in a earlier podcast about how I really saw huge behavior shifts starting, and then after I hit module 7, I just stopped and noticed the behavior was already changed and still changing. And so I took a little break, I guess we did from the podcast, I don't know, holidays or whatever, but finished them up and definitely glad I did. I think it was, I don't know what a good analogy would be. Maybe hearing a beautiful song that comes in different parts and you make it through the first 3 quarters and then you're like, maybe you had to pause to do something, but to finish out that song, it's not only hearing that last part, but it's hearing the whole thing together.
Yeah.
That was a very beautiful, beautiful thing. And the last few modules really do, it's the defining parts of ACT, which I think is great. And that's something, those are the ones I don't know, my favorite quote has been your struggle doesn't define you, you define you. And I think with the values module 7, it lets you look at that and see that all clearly. So I loved it. So don't be like me. Actually finish them out.
No, I like how you described that. I never thought about that, but Life After Pornography, those 10 modules, it is like an album. And each module's a different track, and you might have your favorite ones and ones that you probably don't like as much, but they're in a collection. They are in an album. And sometimes albums are bigger than just each individual track. And I think the first 7 tracks of LAP are really preparatory for these final few tracks, where the first 7 or so are really key to allow you to actually find the ladder that gets you out of this pit that you've been in, this struggle. And really, ACT is all about living your life more consistent with your values. And we need those other kind of earlier preparatory tracks to really allow us to enter that fully. And I like that, that they kind of build on each other. And it's okay to take breaks and be like, I'm going to keep replaying these songs for a little while. But wow, hearing it in its totality, that has been my experience with ACT, is there's some beauty to this idea of once you figure out how your mind works and you can let go of struggles, it really opens up these possibilities for living a value-directed life in a way that I had never really considered before.
Absolutely. And thinking about it, that's the only thing that's ever really been important to me.
Yeah.
And it was my values, ironically, that like kept me in the struggle, because like previously, oh, this is a big sexual sin, and my values that I hold about religion and my own moral compass really had a hard time with what I was struggling with. But now being able to redefine that, reframe that, you're right. It's the latter.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so curious now. So one of my favorite kind of metaphors in those last couple modules is that you are the author of your own book. And if you think about the title of this book you've been writing, it's often something like, I'm a terrible porn addict. And it's like, yeah, that's how other people defined you and maybe how you've defined yourself in the past. But I'm super curious, Brian, like, what is the actual title of your story, your life? What is the one that's actually based on your values and your character that isn't about this porn addiction struggle?
It's funny that you asked that, because that was a really cool exercise for me as well. And I couldn't get over my initial, it was literally like seconds after, it was just my name. Like, I'm Brian Johnson. And I don't know why that held so much power to me. It seems very simple,
Hmm.
but to me, that was a profound realization,
Hmm.
because I'd seen glimpses of who I was my whole life in actions, in what I said, and how I treated people. And that is me. But for some reason, my struggle wasn't letting me be that. And so you're right. For the longest time, my name wasn't even on my book. It wasn't in there. It was just porn in big scarlet letters, right? But to have my name on there now has been that. I'm so glad you asked that. That's really cool.
Wow, that honestly gave me chills because, like, your name is honorable. I mean, that is who you are. And I think about that as the best descriptor. Like, that's it. This is who you are. This is your life. And to put some other label on it or some other role, it really doesn't fit. Like, you are Brian Johnson. End of story. And for me, that life, or I guess that book that's about you and what you want to do and based on your values, that's a bestseller. Like, that's one that people want to read and want to share and talk about online and with their buddies. But the one about being a porn addict, that one's kind of lame. Like, it says the same thing over and over. I don't really want to read that. We don't really want to share it. We don't really want to post about that. But the one about you, truly you, yeah, that's the stuff that movies are made of.
And I hope everyone knows that. Like, I don't think it's specific to pornography that your struggle takes away your identity, or it like shrouds it, clouds it, one of those. But to have the like to be able to realize that you are not this struggle
Yeah.
has just reshaped. Like, that's probably the biggest thing for me that helped, was that reframing.
Yep. You are not this struggle. And that is such a powerful reframe that it doesn't take years and years of really hard work to get there. It's a reframe that we can actually access in a moment, and it can change the course of your life. It doesn't take years and years to work through that. It is a reframe. Those can be pretty quick. And I think, hearing the title of your book, it is really similar to the title of mine. And so as I've thought about, what would I title my own book of life? And I've had different kind of titles as I've thought about that. But the one I keep landing on over and over and over is to be who I've always been. And for me, there's nothing else I want. Like, there's nothing else I need to accomplish, or I'm not competing with anybody. I just want to be who I've always been, to be authentic. And really, I'm just interested in getting back to myself, because I think who we are at a fundamental level is pure and good and wholesome, and I would say divine. And I want to be who I've always been. And I don't want to be some facade of that or some kind of knockoff. I want to be me. So I love your title. I think that fits with kind of how I've considered my own title for my own book that I'm writing.
That's so, and I think that to some extent, your own book is your own book. Your name needs to be on there, and who you are is going to show through that. And for some reason, we think we have the choice of what's on the cover, but what's inside is what matters. And those struggles are not going to be the main parts of that book.
No.
And it's cool. We were talking just a little bit before of, I guess how I've seen that in my in my relationships. And I've spent time with, I've had roommates, and as a missionary, we have our companion that we're with 24/7, and you share great memories together of seeing miracles. And I had these kids who I personally knew very well. I would ask details of their lives, and we'd talk and share. But a lot of them would say, "Hey, we lived together for 6 months, and I really don't even know who you are."
Oh.
And to think about like what I was doing, if we're using the metaphor of this book, I may have had like duct tape over the cover of the book to not say the porn, but like I was just showing them the cover. I was never opening it. And I think of how I would feel if someone was doing that to me. And I know there are people who have, and I honestly feel bad for doing it, because you're cutting a connection before it even happens. You're not allowing yourself to be genuine or authentic. And I think that's such a big contributor to the struggle of pornography is you're not even being yourself. You're not letting yourself be you. And to know what that can do to your mental health is something I never want to experience again.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so glad you're talking about that, because for me, that is the true damage of any struggle, but a struggle with porn is it disconnects you from people in your life, but it disconnects you from yourself because of that shame and because of that hiding. And I think about, so that's who I think about who's been struggling with porn, as someone who is quite separated. And so my thought behind Life After Pornography is, how can I make a program that's really safe to reach that individual who's disconnected from other people, themselves, where they can work on this internal shift, this reframe, discover themselves. But as you journey through these modules, you start to discover that really the path forward is reconnecting with yourself, putting your name back on your book, and actually being you in your relationships. And so it starts as like a pretty personal, private journey, but I hope it doesn't end that way for people. I hope it leads them to being more comfortable with who they are, but then ultimately opening this book up that includes their hopes and dreams, but also includes like, yeah, there's times where I struggle with porn, and then not hiding this book like under the mattress and just being open with that. So I'm curious, as you've opened up, what has this led you to? Like, how are you sharing your book with other people?
Great question. And sorry, I feel like I just need to give a little more context on like the initial reframe that takes to first connect with yourself. Because that, it's funny now that I've been watching all these videos and focused more on the acceptance and commitment therapy approach and listening to all your podcasts and all your videos. It's said over and over that like connection is the antidote to a struggle with pornography. And for the longest time, I thought that was just that support group or that like support person, like 12-step frame of reference. But your connection with yourself is what's initially going to get you better. And that relationship is huge. Sorry, I feel like maybe I just had to talk that out in my own head.
No,
But anyway.
I think that's important, and I think we neglect that we have relationships with all kinds of people in our life, but the most important relationship is probably the one we have with ourselves, and probably the one we neglect the most. And often that relationship, if we have one with ourselves, is pretty abusive, pretty critical, pretty unhealthy. And I know for me, often I neglect the relationship with myself. I'm like, I just don't care. And so I nurture other relationships, but actually cultivating a healthy relationship with yourself does take a lot of work and effort. But even recognizing that, oh, wait, there is a relationship with myself that I need to be aware of, that is a huge turning point.
And that's mindfulness, right? That's being
Yep.
present. And I love the ambiguity. Like connection is the antidote to a problem with, or a struggle with pornography. Like, yes, it's connection with other people, but it's connection with yourself.
Yeah.
And then acceptance and commitment therapy, it's accepting yourself. And when you do that and you have that relationship with yourself and you have your cover on your book and you're willing to share that, you realize how accepting other people are of you, because now your genuine self can connect with other people in a genuine way. And it's so, I just think that's beautiful that there is a side that you have a relationship with yourself. It takes work like any relationship would. But once you establish that, it just spreads naturally because you're going to be able to connect better.
Wow, I wish we could take what you said and make that a public service announcement, because that's it. Because I think what we do is we hide and say, if people really knew me, they would judge me and reject me and don't want anything to do with me. And that's how we feel about ourselves, so we project that on others. But as you come to be like, wow, I'm a person with weaknesses and flaws, and I got dirty and I'm learning and I'm growing, when we're good with that and we can share that from others, I'd say for the most part, people are really accepting and really drawn to that. And when we actually see the true people, it's really rare that we reject them. But often we're so scared, we show people parts and we show people different covers. And often those get rejected because they're not that authentic. And they're like, oh, see, like they didn't even know me and they rejected me. If they really knew me, they wouldn't want anything to know with me. And I think that's what I get to see as a therapist is people will come into me and share things with me that they say, my parents don't know this, my siblings don't know this, my best friends, my partner. And I hear that so much that it's heartbreaking. Like, it's like, I get to see you and know you. And as you show me your book, I mean, you're a beautiful person. And it's really sad for me that nobody in your life truly knows you. And for me, that's not a way to live. And so my goal is to help them feel safe that, oh, Cameron got to know me and he's okay with me. Maybe other people can too. And that's what I want for people. Like, I love getting to know people, but in the end, I want people in their life to get to know them in the very same way.
Absolutely. And in terms of the blessings that have come from this program, that has got to be the biggest one. That's absolutely, I mean, to me, that fits more of a recovery definition than anything. You're recovering this relationship with yourself. And it's weird because it was always there, but it would try and like come up at times and you'd like whack-a-mole it or something, you know, like it would pop up and you'd be like, oh no, that's like a part of me I actually know. Like you just hammer it. Like it's the weirdest thing. But now that you have that switch perspective, you realize that that is you. And you can see that in other people. It's such a blessing. And sorry, that was a
No,
nice little.
I loved your definition of recovery. I can get behind that. I can't get behind recovery means sobriety or abstinence from a behavior. For me, that doesn't work. But if recovery means you've recovered your identity and your sense of self, it's like, oh yeah, I support that kind of recovery all the time. Like that word, for maybe the first time, honestly, Brian, that word might have meaning for me. Where if we're going for that kind of recovery, I'm all for it. But that's different than abstinence or sobriety. It's recovering your sense of self. That's beautiful.
For sure. And it was always there. Yourself was always there, and it's just getting it back, or letting it show might be a better way to say that.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. That's true recovery.
No, there it is. There it is. Sorry, but to answer your earlier question, of the less personal but more general form of connection that comes from the program, I've seen, it's just been cool. I think, and I'm uncomfortable talking about this because I frankly don't know how to talk about this, but like me wanting to help after I was introduced to this program, was, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how to talk about this, but wanting to help people who I know were in a situation much like mine, where they didn't know where to go for help, or they went somewhere for help and it wasn't helpful. And so I've seen, having established that connection with myself and now being able to connect on such a better level with people, that's been so powerful in helping me be me. I think a part of me is a person who would do that, who would connect with people deeply and talk about these vulnerable things and validate their vulnerability. And that's Brian Johnson. That's might be the, like that initial first page, if there's a motto to the book. That's what I stand for. And so I think in my connections with others, I'm furthering my connection with myself because I'm practicing being myself. But in turn, I think, and this might take a slightly religious or divine approach, but I think we've each been blessed with a unique self that when we are who we are naturally a blessing to other people.
Yep. Amen.
And that's where beauty comes from. Anyone, the greats, I don't care if it's sports or art or any form of expression in business, if you're a CPA, if you're a dentist, I think if there's part of you in that, I think that's where you find happiness and you bless others. And wow, this is not taking the turn I thought it was going to, but that's such a powerful message to me. And that's what the program's about. It's living a better life.
Yeah.
And you're going to live a better life and help other people live a better life.
Yeah. And you took that and ran with it. You're not just like saying stuff where it's like, well, I got past that porn issue, I'm good to go. It's, you're actually taking some steps to improve people's lives in your own community, within your own faith group. And what you're doing, Brian, is just incredible to me. I'd love for people to know kind of how you've taken these principles to heart. And it's like, time to go to work. Like once you get your feet under you and you recover back to yourself, that's not the end. That's like, okay, now what can I do with this? And you're doing.
Yeah, I think I've said it before. I would feel wrong or disingenuous if I didn't do something with it. And so, like you mentioned, in my faith group in our church, um, it's been cool to see the current status of, I'm trying to be careful about how I talk about this. it's a very prevalent problem. And I think that might be an understatement. But especially where I'm located, in a demographic, in a city with a very specific demographic, my age group, and a lot of competition, a lot of pressure, a lot of perfectionism, within social culture and also within religion culture. And like we've talked about before, those are a lot of the factors you don't want going in the pot for a recipe for a struggle with pornography.
Yep.
And so I've had conversations with friends, who will talk about it, and it's so great to be able to say, I'm here. Like, let's be vulnerable. Let's connect. Let's be genuine. Let's meet each other, right? And so what I'm trying to do is take these principles and put them into a group setting. And so the idea kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier with connection. When you take the Life After program and how you're going to connect with yourself and have a relationship with yourself, but if you're doing that in a group setting and you're being validated and accepted and loved, like that's best case scenario right there.
Yeah.
And so I'm really excited to keep working on this, and I'm excited to hear what more people think. I'm excited to hear other people's insights into the principles, what values they hold dear, who they are. Imagine if everyone in the world was genuine. If they were actually themselves, we'd have 7 point whatever billion people being their best selves.
Yeah.
We'd be, that's like a definition of heaven right there.
It'd be beautiful, and I don't think we'd have the political conflicts that we have, and left versus right, and all these struggles if
Oh yeah.
you kind of let that guard down and defensiveness. And in so many ways, we've dehumanized ourselves when we come to these struggles, but we dehumanize other people. We put them into these groups, and now they're the enemies, they're the opposition. But if we were back to being genuine and humanized each other, I mean, we would be connected. And we would see the good in all people, because I truly believe that. I don't think there's, well, this group's the good ones and these are the bad ones. I don't believe that. I think at our core as humans, we're good people. And if we were genuine, it would be a beautiful place.
I agree. So that's what we're going for. That's the goal.
I just think it's amazing where you went through this program. I mean, the lights turned on for you and you're like, okay, like I see how social support and connection was really helpful in these 12-step groups. And for me, that's the benefit of kind of AA or addiction groups, is that support, that mentorship, not being alone. There just isn't research support for the actual 12 steps for pornography use or even substance use for that matter. But the actual structure of being together and sharing and being open and being able to reach out to me, that is wonderful. And that's why AA and NA has been helpful for all these years. It's that component. But if we took away the 12-step part and instead added treatments that we know are effective, that's best practice right there. Like, we know we need the connection, we need the support, we need actual quality psychological principles too, and that's acceptance and commitment therapy. And I think to be able to do that, like what you're doing, where you're actually chatting with folks within your church group and organizing this group and you're going to kind of lead it, like participant led, just like AA, but with principles that we know are helpful. That's the best of both worlds.
I'm so excited. And I remember how excited I was initially with, well, I was petrified actually of ARP and being that vulnerable. But I do, and we've talked about this before, that was the one benefit, was that connection and being accepted, because you walk in there and everyone else is with you
Mm.
and you're with them. And it's that sense of belonging that's just such a natural human condition. But you're right. I remember my behavior didn't change that much. And so if you get research backed programs, acceptance and commitment therapy, we're going to be cranking out success stories like no one's business. I'm
Oh,
excited.
I love just the visual of that. Like you're starting your group, and how cool would it be for people that go through lab, go through ACT to say, you know what, I'm going to make a difference in my community with my friends and help other people learn these concepts too. Like this could spread in much the same way like these AA groups have spread, because there's a need for support and connection, and but also to have these principles. That would be remarkable. That for me is the cure for this epidemic, if it's an epidemic, is to come together and share these principles. And it's like, yeah, I think we could kind of solve our porn struggle with this.
And to think of all the other, if you were to initiate this earlier on, and we've talked about this a little bit, it's pornography is just a reinforcer, right? It's something you turn to solve an emotional concern. Imagine if that early on these principles were taught and kids didn't turn to sex or drugs or like criminal behavior. I
Yeah,
mean, it would just be amazing to see. Uh, it's a big thought, but
it's a big
a
thought.
beautiful one.
I think we've started where I've seen some more kind of pilot studies, but they're introducing mindfulness training in elementary schools. We're teaching these kids to sit and observe their thoughts and emotions, be more aware of their body, what are their needs. So if you're getting frustrated, instead of going to timeout, it's like, yeah, let's take a moment. You know, what's going on for you? Let's do some breathing. Let's understand where you're at in this moment. So to actually teach people how to, number one, be aware of your body and emotions and thoughts. But part of that awareness is learning how to regulate them too. And if we could start that as part of our education, that is how we prevent against, like you said, the crime, drug use, pornography. And it's not these independent programs, it's teaching these core skills of mindful awareness. And if we could do that and cultivate a better relationship with ourselves early on, instead of one that's critical and judgmental, then we would have a healthier nation.
As you were talking, I hope this isn't too right field of a question, but why is it now? It seems like in the past, maybe these problems weren't as prevalent, or maybe there just weren't as many people, or maybe media services have allowed us to see all these negative repercussions. But it seems like everything's so heightened now. The intensity is just top level all the time. And honestly, that might be part of the problem. But like, if these principles weren't taught before, why are they so needed now? Does that
Yeah.
make sense as a question?
Oh, yeah. And I think we do have some understanding of that. So I think I might be off, but I think the year the first smartphone came out was 2008, I think. There might have been ones before that, but when the first major one was produced and distributed and kind of popular, so that was probably about 12 years ago now, 13 years ago. From that point on, we started to see kind of increases in disconnection, in more comparisons, more disingenuine behavior, where now we can share these perfect images of ourselves online, and we're all about getting clicks and likes, and not being our authentic self, but being a polished plastic self. And there's been lots of studies that like more friends on social media actually correlated with less happiness and satisfaction and well-being in your life. And it's like, whoa, what's going on? So I think as technology is advanced, and I'm a proponent of technology, I think it's wonderful, but there's always byproducts that are unanticipated. It's like, oh, we can connect with everybody online. This is beautiful. But with that connection, we saw less human connection, less personal connection. And we've seen increases in mental health struggles kind of correlate with advances in technology. And so I think there's something going on there where because we're able to pull out a smartphone when we're sitting in a waiting room or waiting to get on the bus or in a classroom or waiting for a meeting to start, there's a little bit of discomfort in those social situations. And we used to, like, well, we had to initiate a conversation and introduce ourselves and, oh, where are you from and what are you doing and what do you like? And we were building connections, and those were meaningful. Those were nutrition for us. And now it's like, oh, there's a little bit of discomfort there. So we all go right to our smartphones to avoid that discomfort. And so what I've seen is we've got a generation of folks, and now even the older folks are developing this, where we're less capable for managing discomfort and distress. We used to develop that skill set by naturally being in those situations and being open with people. And now the norm is avoid those conversations, avoid eye contact at all costs, scroll through social media. So we are not cultivating the skill set to manage discomfort. And so there's a couple things going on. That's a big part of it. We don't know how to manage our own distress, and we're less connected. That's a recipe for more suicidal thoughts, for more substance use, for more porn issues, more eating concerns. And it often comes from, technology is great, but also we have to learn to adjust to it and navigate it in a healthy way. And I don't think we're there yet. I think we're starting to be aware, like, oh, wait, more time on social media makes me feel worse. Okay, like, how do we do this responsibly? And I think we're just beginning to see the ramifications of where we've been for over a decade.
As answers go, that was wow. Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I remember hearing it's not like recent, but a few years ago, a lot of people were worried about like the lack of human connection. And I feel like it's even that as an issue being raised has gone down a little bit. But I'm glad that, I don't know, that makes so much sense. And I don't want to move on from that too fast because I think there's so much we could talk about there. But personally, and maybe I was thinking selfishly, I remember questioning like my personality and my connections as I've been in this struggle. Because I always heard the word extrovert, introvert. And I'm like, okay, maybe I'm just an introvert. Maybe I just hate people. Right? Like, and what kind of a mentality is that? But I remember thinking to myself, like, oh no, I have an excuse to not connect. And it's my personality, and I'm an introvert. I know for a fact that there's a different personality that is bubbly at a party, and then there's a slightly more reserved. But is introvert and extrovert a good distinguisher of your ability to connect?
Oh, that's interesting. Let me think through that out loud. So I think about when we look at personality traits, we often boil them down to 5 major ones. And some of those are openness to experience, conscientiousness, which is my favorite one. It's pretty important. agreeableness, neuroticism, and extroversion, introversion. So that's one of the major ones where if you kind of assess people's global personality traits, we'd fall somewhere on that spectrum of extroversion, introversion. And I'm curious where you'd put yourself on that spectrum now. But I know personally, I'm on the introverted side. I definitely am. That I am recharged by spending time with myself, reflecting on ideas. I enjoy one-on-one connections and conversations. In group settings, it's not my scene as much. Those can be quite draining. And yet I enjoy lecturing and teaching college courses, and I enjoy doing workshops with hundreds of people because those are part of my values. And I find those quite connecting, but they're also very draining. So often I think about introversion, extroversion as where do you get your energy from? And for me, it's not lots and lots of people. That's draining. I get some connection there too, but for me, these more intimate connections, one-on-one, small groups, like I love group therapy where I've got 10 people. That's so connecting for me, but honestly, those are simultaneously energizing and draining too. So I think it's introverts definitely know how to connect. Extroverts can connect. I think it's more about where you get your energy from and where you replenish, but both of those are connections. And I think you're right that some people do say, well, I'm an introvert. That's my excuse for not connecting. I don't think that's the most helpful way to think about introversion. I spent a lot of time with my connections and am still pretty introverted.
It's funny, you listed off those like 5 big personality traits. I can't tell you how many personality tests I've taken, and I don't think I've heard any one of those on any of those tests. Like,
Oh my goodness. And we probably should have this chat. Like the things we know through psychology, research, and theory are not the things that the public consumes. They're
right,
not. Like I've seen all these online personality inventories. I'm like, these are not based on anything. They're not helpful. They're probably cute and fun. But like the
right.
big 5 personality traits, they've been researched for decades and predict real world outcomes. And you can follow like temperament in a toddler, and that predicts these traits that follow people for a lifetime. These have some incredible predictive validity, and yet most people don't even know about them or know where they fall on those spectrum. And it's like, oh, that's actually useful. But the random personality inventories people make up are like a party game. They're not that helpful. They're not based on anything. But the big 5 personality traits, mountains of data and evidence and longitudinal studies that span decades. It's like there's really neat things there, but most people don't know about it.
Meanwhile, I'm over here basing my entire self-worth off like which house of Harry Potter I'm in, right? Like,
My gosh. Yeah, I'll have people say, I took this personality test and I'm this color. What does that mean? I'm like, I have no idea. I have no idea.
so funny.
But yeah, I'm probably in Slytherin if I had to determine
Okay.
what house I'm in. I don't know. You're right. Those things are fun. They stimulate conversation. So I think that's good. But they're not based on science. They're not based on theory. Just like addiction, that language and that approach, it helps people connect and it gives people a framework and it gives you a dialogue. But it's not theory based. It's not evidence based.
You said consciousness or conscientiousness was your favorite.
Conscientiousness. Oh, yeah.
Can we get some elaboration on that one?
Oh, my gosh. I don't know where we're taking this podcast. We got to wrap this thing up. So conscientiousness, oh, maybe this is relevant. You're probably a really high C, really high in conscientiousness. Probably so high, it contributed to your pornography struggle. I haven't thought about this, but I'm sure there's a correlation between conscientiousness and perfectionism. So I would say conscientiousness is a healthy adaptive trait. If you take it beyond that, it probably is perfectionism. So conscientiousness is being aware of your responsibilities, making sure you're kind of getting your tasks done. It's being aware of other people's thoughts and feelings, being aware of yourself. It's being kind of courteous to people in your life, that if you made a commitment, you're going to follow through on that. And so people that are high in conscientiousness are fantastic employees. They're great students. They actually earn more money. They're quite successful in their life and have really healthy relationships. If you go beyond conscientiousness, it's probably perfectionism, I'm guessing. But if we can take it back a notch, being conscientiousness and being aware of yourself and other people and being respectful and reliable and following through on your commitments is a really adaptive personality trait.
I felt a few of those. I think I think you might be onto something. And you're right, that'll probably might be a conversation for another podcast, but I think I've been so, I don't even mean this in a selfish way, but like I am a fascinating individual. and you are a fascinating individual, but it's like I think of how excited I am to meet someone else now.
Yeah.
But being able to meet myself with that same amount of energy and understanding how I work and how I get where I get my energy from.
Yep.
That's all important and relevant. And for a while, I felt bad about focusing on myself. I don't know why. It seems illogical, but I figured if I just kind of like lost myself and went and I don't know, helped others, that's all I needed. But self-help and self-health, I think, is an essential practice.
Yeah. It's so important. And I think that's the first phase. And I think as an introvert, my preference would be to understand myself and help myself by myself. But you actually can't. And I'm probably surprised on almost a daily basis the things I'm learning about myself. And I often learn these things about myself in the context of relationships. And it isn't until I get to know other people and I'm like, oh, they're built differently than me. I had an assumption everybody felt and thought like me. And so the best way to get to know yourself, or not the best way, but maybe the next step is it's through other people. And so that's why I love doing therapy groups, is you can get to know yourself through personal counseling to an extent. And then we start to understand ourselves even better through others and relationships. And that's the next step. And that's what I love. Like you said, I'm an interesting person. And that's what I love about my work as a psychologist, is I could say that about every person I meet. And they probably lead pretty typical lives, but honestly, getting to know each person, they are really unique. And it's incredible to get to know. It's like Christmas every time I meet somebody new. It's like, oh, I get to know you and how you work. And this is really unique and special. And the world doesn't ever get to see people like this. But it's beautiful. And as I get to know people, I actually get to learn more about myself. Where it's like, whoa, I've never discovered this about you. This helps me understand this about me better. And that's the beauty of connection. There's this synergistic effect. The better you know yourself and the better you can know other people, the better you can know yourself and other people. It just keeps going. And I don't think that's ever going to stop.
I'm always so impressed at where these podcasts end, because this is like a beautiful, a beautiful principle. And I'm glad we've talked about this, because for a struggle that tears your self-worth and self-image apart, hearing that you are beautiful, but more importantly, knowing and understanding that you are beautiful and unique, and that those you want to connect with and need to connect with are beautiful and unique as well.
Yeah.
That's where the power comes from. I think you're right.
And that is recovery. And that recovery is possible. I think I'm okay with that word now. I've had such negative associations with that word, but I'm like, no, if that's recovery, I'm all for it.
We got it.
Yep. Cool. Well, let's stop there before we introduce a dozen other topics, and then we'll pick one of those and have another chat next week.
I'm excited.
Okay. See you, Brian.
Thank you. Bye.
Hey, thanks for listening. Please remember to rate and subscribe. I know you might be facing some issues in your life or know someone who is. Issues like anxiety, challenges in dealing with emotions, or other compulsive behaviors like unwanted pornography. And I know it's tough to talk to people about problems. Difficult to stare those obstacles down that we face in life and to really know how to deal with them. It's hard to know what to say and when to say it. And then when that moment you finally reach out to family and friends happens, sometimes it falls flat. I haven't found many programs teaching effective strategies like mindfulness, how to improve relationships, and ways to address unwanted pornography viewing through research-supported principles. So whether you simply want to help with a problem like unwanted pornography, difficulty responding to emotions, or just want to understand the world of someone struggling with porn a little better, head over to LifeAfterPornography.com and get in on the next training. There you'll learn the exact same strategies individuals addicted to pornography used to transform their lives by implementing principles from evidence-based treatment shown effective in research for reducing unwanted pornography viewing. You'll learn the secrets, the myths, the enemies to recovery, and the LAP framework for dealing with unwanted porn viewing that we call WAVE. If that's something that interests you, click the link in the description or just head over to lifeafterpornography.com. I'm Dr. Cameron Staley. See you on the inside.